She was 21 and sleeping inside the back seat of her dead mother's old sedan after losing the last job she had left. The car smelled like cold coffee, damp clothes, and old paper receipts shoved beneath the seats. Every night condensation crept across the inside of the windows until the entire car felt underwater. She kept a blanket wrapped around her shoulders even during warmer nights, because loneliness had a strange way of making everything colder. Her name was Clara Bennett, and 3 weeks earlier she had been evicted from the tiny apartment she could barely afford. The diner where she worked had closed suddenly after the owner suffered a stroke. The landlord changed the locks 2 days later. No warning, no kindness, just silence. At first, Clara thought things would turn around. Quickly, she drove from town to town, filling out applications, gas stations, grocery stores, motels, anywhere with a help wanted sign taped crookedly against dusty windows. But small towns remembered desperation. People looked at her clothes, her tired eyes, the way she counted coins carefully before buying coffee. And slowly doors stopped opening. That was how she ended up parked beside an abandoned feed store outside a forgotten farming town in western Kansas. And that was where she first saw the water tower. It stood far beyond a dead field of yellow grass, leaning slightly against a gray sky, like something too stubborn to fall apart. Completely rust crawled down its legs in dark streaks. Half the ladder was missing, the town name painted across the tank had faded so badly only a few letters remained. Most people would have ignored it, but Clara noticed a small auction sign hanging crookedly from a fence post. Abandoned municipal property, $5 minimum bid. $5. Less than the stale sandwich sitting beside her on the passenger seat. She bought it the next morning using wrinkled cash and a handful of quarters. The clerk laughed softly when he handed over the papers. "You know that thing's empty, right?" Clara only nodded, because empty things sometimes felt familiar. But what she didn't know was something had been waiting inside that rusted tank for nearly 60 years. And before the week was over, the entire town would be standing beneath that tower in complete silence. Before we continue, if stories like this remind you that even broken places can still hold something valuable, take a moment to subscribe. And if you've ever gone through a season where life felt empty, stay with the story, because sometimes the strangest roads lead somewhere meaningful. Clara's grandfather used to say water towers were the hearts of small towns. When the tower dies, the town starts forgetting itself. She remembered hearing those words when she was 8 years old, sitting beside him in the garage, while rain hammered against the tin roof overhead. Her grandfather, Walter Bennett, repaired farm equipment for a living. Old things trusted him. That was what people said. Broken tractors, rusting grain mills, clocks that hadn't worked in 20 years. He fixed them slowly, patiently, like every object deserved dignity. His garage smelled like machine oil cedar with tobacco smoke and iron dust. Clara spent half her childhood there watching his rough hands rebuild forgotten things. He never rushed. Everything talks. Most people just don't listen long enough. After her mother died, when Clara was 14, Walter became the closest thing she had left to stability. Her father had disappeared years earlier after gambling debts swallowed everything they owned. Some people claimed he moved south, others said prison. Clara stopped asking. Walter raised her quietly after that, not with speeches, not with advice, just routines. Early mornings, soup simmering on the stove, boots by the door, radio static humming softly during snowstorms. Sometimes at night, he told stories about the old farming towns scattered across Kansas, places swallowed by droughts, factories closing, families leaving. He always sounded sad when he talked about water towers. They hold memories longer than people do. At the time, Clara thought he was just being poetic. Now, sitting inside her car, staring toward that abandoned tower, the memory returned so sharply it hurt. Walter had died 2 winters earlier from lung disease. The hospital room smelled sterile, and cold. Clara still remembered the sound of oxygen machines clicking beside his bed. His final words to her had been strange. "Don't be afraid of forgotten places." At the funeral, only 12 people came. Afterward, Clara inherited a rusted toolbox, an old flannel jacket, and $500 that disappeared quickly into rent and bills. But she also inherited something harder to explain. Patience, the kind that survives silence, the kind needed to stand beside abandoned things long enough to hear their stories. The first time Clara walked toward the tower, the wind was strong enough to bend the tall grass sideways. The structure sat nearly half a mile beyond town beside a dry maintenance shed and cracked concrete basin. Birds nested beneath the steel supports. Every step closer revealed new layers of decay. Bolts covered in orange rust. Broken ladder rungs. Peeling paint fluttering like dead skin. The tower groaned softly in the wind. Not loudly, just enough to make her stop walking. The sound reminded her of an old ship settling against waves. She tilted her head upward. The tank itself looked enormous from below. Dark stain spread beneath the seams. One side had partially collapsed inward years earlier, leaving warped metal folded like crushed paper. Most people would have walked away immediately. Clara almost did. Then she noticed something strange. Near the base of one support beam sat an old metal lockbox chained to the steel leg. The box had been pried open years earlier, empty now except for dead insects and dirt. But scratched into the inside lid were 3 words. Still down there. Clara frowned. The letters looked old. Hand-carved. Not graffiti from bored teenagers. She glanced around instinctively. The field remained silent. Only wind. Only grass. Still, something about those words stayed with her the entire night. She spent the next 3 days cleaning the area around the tower. Not because she had a plan. Mostly because movement kept panic away. She gathered broken bottles, dragged weeds from concrete cracks, cleared trash from the maintenance shed. Inside the shed, she found dusty tools, moldy paperwork, and dozens of old town maintenance records stacked inside filing cabinets swollen from moisture. One evening, while rain tapped gently across the roof, Clara opened a drawer filled with maps. Waterline maps, old engineering sketches, repair notes. Most were too damaged to read, but one document caught her attention immediately. A handwritten maintenance report dated October 1967. Part of the page had water damage, but one sentence remained visible. Tank access sealed after accident. Mayor requested no further inspection. No further inspection. Clara read the sentence 3 times. Accident. What accident? The rest of the file was missing. That night, she couldn't sleep. Rain hit the car roof softly while the tower silhouette stood against distant lightning flashes. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. Everything talks. Around midnight, she grabbed a flashlight and walked back toward the tower. The field smelled wet and earthy after the storm. Mud clung to her boots. Wind rattled loose steel somewhere above her. Then she heard it, a faint metallic sound. Clink, pause, clink. Like something swinging slowly inside the tower. She froze. The flashlight beam trembled slightly across rusted supports. Again, clink. The sound came from above, inside the tank. Clara stared upward into darkness. The opening hatch near the ladder hung partially crooked, moving gently with the wind. She told herself it was only loose metal, nothing more. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tower wasn't completely empty. The next morning, Clara bought climbing gloves from a hardware store using her last $20. The cashier looked confused. You planning to climb that death trap? Maybe you should reconsider. She smiled weakly. If I reconsider every bad idea I've had lately, I won't have anything left. By noon, she stood beneath the ladder staring upward. Half the rungs had rusted through completely, others bent dangerously beneath pressure, but enough remained. Barely. The climb took nearly 40 minutes. Wind slammed against the tower harder the higher. She climbed, her arms shook from exhaustion halfway up, once her boot slipped badly enough to scrape skin from her knee. But eventually she reached the platform beneath the tank. The entire structure swayed gently. Not enough to collapse. Enough to remind her how high she was. The hatch leading inside sat partially jammed. Layers of rust cracked loose when she forced it open. A terrible smell drifted out immediately. Old water. Metal. Something stale trapped for decades. Clara covered her mouth and shined the flashlight inside. Darkness swallowed the beam at first. Then slowly, shapes emerged. The inside of the tank was far larger than she expected. The floor curved slightly inward beneath thick layers of rust, and debris rainwater puddled across sections of metal. And hanging from a loose interior pipe near the center was an old chain, moving slightly. Clink. There it was again. The sound. She stepped carefully inside. Every movement echoed. The air felt heavy and strangely cold compared outside. Her flashlight swept across old graffiti covering sections of the walls, names, dates, crude drawings, most decades old. Then she noticed something else. Near the far edge of the tank floor sat a raised metal section, unlike the surrounding surface. Almost like a hatch. Her heartbeat quickened. The metal looked newer than everything around it. Not new exactly, just different, less corroded. Someone had replaced it years after the tower was built. She crouched beside it carefully. No handle, no visible hinges, just a circular plate sealed tightly against the floor. And beside it, tiny scratch marks, as if someone once tried desperately to pry it open. Clara returned every day after that. The tower consumed her thoughts completely. She borrowed old town newspapers from the tiny local library, searching for information about the 1967 accident. Most records were incomplete, but fragments appeared. A maintenance worker disappeared during repairs. Mayor refused interviews. Tower closed temporarily. Then suddenly, nothing. No follow-up stories. No body recovered. No investigation records. Almost like the entire town decided collectively to stop talking about it. The librarian, an elderly woman named June Holloway, noticed Clara's interest. "You bought that old tower, didn't you?" Clara nodded. June hesitated before speaking again. "My husband used to say something strange happened up there." "What kind of strange?" The woman stared toward the window quietly. "He said people heard noises for years after the accident." "What noises?" "Knocking." Clara felt cold suddenly. June leaned closer. "The maintenance man who disappeared, his name was Edwin Mercer, folks, said he knew something about missing town money before he vanished." "Missing money? That's just gossip." June waved dismissively. Small towns survive on gossip. But Clara noticed her hands shaking slightly. That night, Clara returned to the tower with a pry bar. Wind howled across the plains hard enough to shake the structure again. Inside the tank, darkness pressed heavily around her flashlight beam. She knelt beside the circular plate and wedged the pry bar beneath its edge. Nothing. She tried harder. Rust cracked loudly. The metal shifted half an inch. A deep hollow sound echoed beneath. Not solid flooring. Empty space. Clara's breathing quickened. Again she forced the bar downward. The plate lifted slightly this time. Enough to reveal darkness underneath. And something else. A smell. Not decay. Paper. Old dry paper trapped underground. Hands trembling, she pulled harder. The plate screeched open slowly. Dust exploded upward. Her flashlight beam dropped into the hidden compartment beneath the tank floor. At first she only saw wooden crates. Then canvas bags. Then metal boxes stacked tightly inside the narrow chamber. And finally, a small leather journal resting carefully on top. Clara climbed down slowly into the hidden space. The compartment was barely tall enough to crouch inside. Dust coated everything thickly. She opened one canvas bag carefully. Money. Bundles of old cash wrapped in decayed bank paper. Her mouth fell open. Another bag. More money. Metal lockboxes filled with silver coins. Jewelry. Property deeds. It looked impossible. Like something from another life. But the journal mattered more, because someone had placed it deliberately where it would be found first. The cover read, Edwin Mercer Private Notes. Clara opened carefully to the first page. The handwriting shook slightly. October 4th, 1967. They're stealing from the town. If something happens to me, the proof is below. She swallowed hard. Page after page revealed the story slowly. Town officials had been siphoning federal drought relief money during the 1960s. Edwin discovered it accidentally while repairing pipeline systems beneath the tower. The hidden chamber had originally been built decades earlier during wartime as emergency storage. The mayor used it to hide stolen cash temporarily. Edwin planned to expose everything. But before he could, something happened. The final journal entry stopped Clara cold. October 11th, 1967. They know I found the chamber. If I don't leave town tomorrow, I think. The sentence never finished. Nothing after that. Only a dark stain smeared across the page edge. Clara sat silently beneath the tower for a long time. Wind moaned through the tank overhead. She realized suddenly why the hatch had scratch marks. Someone had tried to escape. The discovery spread through town within days. At first, people didn't believe her. Then police opened the chamber officially. Reporters arrived. Historians. State investigators. The hidden money after decades of legal review and unclaimed ownership complications totaled nearly $1.8 million in recovered assets and historical valuables. But strangely, that wasn't what affected Clara most. It was Edwin's journal, because buried between evidence pages and financial notes were personal entries, small human moments. He wrote about feeding stray dogs near the tower, about worrying over his daughter's school shoes, about missing his wife after night shifts. One line shattered Clara completely. Some things disappear because people are afraid of the truth, but silence rots communities faster than drought. Her grandfather would have loved those words. Clara could have sold the tower immediately after media attention exploded. Developers offered money. Collectors called constantly, but she refused. Instead, she used part of the legal settlement awarded to her after the historical recovery process to restore the tower slowly. Not perfectly, just honestly. She hired local welders, cleaned the property herself, turned the maintenance shed into a tiny museum dedicated to forgotten workers and dying towns. Some days she failed badly. Rain delayed repairs. Money disappeared faster than expected. Tourists lost interest quickly. There were nights she sat alone again wondering if she made a mistake. But then small things started happening. Old residents returned to visit. Former families donated photographs. Children from nearby schools toured the site. The town slowly began remembering itself again. And Clara, for the first time in years, stopped feeling invisible. One afternoon, June Holloway visited carrying an old photograph. "This belonged to my husband," she said softly. The picture showed workers standing beneath the tower in 1966. Among them stood Edwin Mercer, smiling faintly toward the camera. Clara framed it inside the museum, right beside Walter Bennett's old rusted toolbox. Years later, visitors still ask Clara the same question. Were you scared climbing up there alone? She always smiled quietly before answering. Yes, then after a pause. But sometimes fear is the doorway to the thing trying to find you. On winter evenings, she still climbed halfway up the tower platform, sometimes just to watch sunset spread across the empty Kansas fields. Wind moved differently up there, softer, like whispers passing through old steel. And every time she looked across the horizon, she remembered the girl sleeping inside a freezing car, believing her life had already collapsed beyond repair. Back then, she thought she bought an abandoned tower because she was desperate. But deep down, maybe she bought it because forgotten things recognize each other. Because her grandfather was right. Everything talks. Most people just leave before hearing the important part. And maybe that's the real reason stories like this matter. Not because of hidden money. Not because of mysteries. But because somewhere out there, someone listening right now might feel abandoned too. Like life overlooked them. Like the world stopped noticing. But hidden value exists in places people stop looking. Sometimes inside buildings. Sometimes inside people. So if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional mystery journeys like this. And in the comments, tell us about a place, object, or memory you could never forget even after years passed. Because sometimes forgotten things are still waiting for someone willing to listen.